Well, hello everyone. Here to show you right here talking about for InDesign type work right here, and I'm sure that most of us, who are familiar with the InDesign know of talking about is toward if you want to go ahead and start with maybe three pieces or maybe four pieces, and then maybe let's just say if you're trying to create a story or something like that, anything else that you want to talk about really. But really though, that what is the main purpose to why we would want to use InDesign, for number one, and like everybody else might even say too, that yeah, well really, that the main reason you would maybe want to use InDesign, for the most part is that if you have a lot of files that need to be put together and contained for a project. Like let's just say if you're trying to build something that if you want to add more pages to it, or if you just want to add some more information to what you're trying to work with, stuff like that. But this right here actually is just like a shorter example of what I'm talking about right here. And talking about right here, I'm talking about for the solar eclipse right here. And you can see this right here that based on from what I was studying is toward that when we're talking about InDesign documents, though, that it's pretty much is that if you're trying to build a project, right? So let's just say that if you were to be if you were explore go into for the Photoshop document and update that current version of that file on from Photoshop or from Illustrator or even from Lightroom, and then those updates would show up in these files, and then I'm like, yeah, and these images right here. So pretty much is that when we talk about InDesign right here, that I'm like, yeah, most of, if you want to kind of call it modification, to where if there's any updates that took place based on the images that you used in any media that you may have used at the beginning, that if you did any updates on that file, then it would show up. And so it's like, yeah, so I really think that would be really good. And like if you're going to be maybe working for a publishing company such as maybe the New York Times, or maybe the Wall Street or your Washington Post or something like that, that you would want to receive updates about that. But this right here actually shows right here are these images of the solar eclipse right here. And most of them are Illustrator type paintings right here, are paintings, but you can see this right here that let's just say that if each one of these thumbnails would include a story right here. So like in case of anybody that may want to know too, that talk about for the solar eclipse right here, that if you want to go ahead and that for ways of how you'll be able to explain your stories and maybe about anything that you want to talk about from each image. So let's just say that if you were trying to build a story just using three pages, that you would be able to you'll be able to minimize a lot of the text and writing and all that, just to be able to the text wrap and everything, just to be able to fit around the pages. But it sure seems that way, that the way we think about that though, whenever it comes to InDesign, that so much activity that you can do just by only using four documents here. So let's just say if you have a lot of information that you're trying to put together into a project using InDesign, then yeah, that it's basically another way of how you want to use InDesign is basically, Michael, you are pretty much that you just have this ability to where that you can actually shrink down the size of the media to where it's now being provided on this document right here, and you can use that document so that way people can see what is it that you're trying to talk about. So a lot of times if we're talking about maybe a news headline documents or anything like that, if you have any I'm like, if you have any papers, I'm like, if you have any pictures, or any other source of text media or something like that that you would like to use. But like for the for instance right here that I'm using right here, I talk about for the solar eclipse right here. So like anybody else would maybe say to where that it's starting to kind of remind me just a little bit like before and after pictures, right? But this right here actually talks about for pixels, and you can see right here the pixels right here, if there was any if you were using maybe any filters or something like that, just to be able to capture a lot of these images right here. And so that's why that I have that right there, is that, knowing about one part of the photo looks like it's getting lighter and darker right there. But it sure seems that way that when we speak about InDesign, though, is that just another way of stating to where that it's a program to where you're able to design a web page, or if you want to kind of look at it as towards a way of how you're trying to design a source of a directory, and like a booklet, and a booklet that contains the graphics, the media, and also the updated headlines or anything else that you want to comment. So basically that if you were to be building any sort of project using InDesign, they'll tell you that if you're going to be using InDesign to do a lot of that, then the key factor matters is just know is that about how to place the media, but then also how to use the layers, how to work the layers, and also about any media that if you were trying to use any of the same files that you used from the Photoshop program, and then also if you had any media that you were you trying to use. I'm like, yeah. So if we're talking about any files that you were using from maybe Camera Raw, or maybe After Effects, or any programs like that. But it sure seems that way that when we're talking about for InDesign and Distiller, though, that we're talking about images right here. If we can all see this right here, is actually the picture I took right here, of the lake right there with the sun right there for sunset right there, and it sure seems that way that whenever we think about photographs, a lot of times that number one, a lot of photographers would maybe say this to where that if you're going to be working with a project, and let's just say that maybe if sometimes that like any media that you may have used from earlier was not saved in that same root location. So let's just say if you had it saved on on a memory stick or something like that, then it would show on there on the InDesign document that we cannot locate this file right here, this image, and so that's why it seems like that whenever we're talking about building a project using InDesign, that whenever you go back to it later on, you're going to be getting these notifications about when it was last modified, when it was last opened, and when it was last edited, and so that's why it sure seems that way that when we think about InDesign, though, that we need to think about that toward that what you are basically doing. You're building a project that contains more than 15 or 20 pages, but at the same time, it's something that you can condense it to be able to make it smaller, and of course, if you want to go ahead and add a story on top of it, but you talk about for in copyright, but it sure seems that way that when we speak about InDesign, that you're likely want to know too that when we speak about InDesign, that what we're talking about is that a lot of times whenever you start out with only maybe one or two pages, about how much media can fit on one page, and for any reason at all, why do you think that you would add maybe 5 more pages on top of that project? And so it sure seems that way that we are probably thinking too that, well, really, that if we're talking about one image right here, and let's just say that if you had anything that you want to share on top of that, plus that there was any text that you want to place around that image, and that's why it's like, yeah, well, really, so it's like the things that you can do with InDesign, but I tell you one thing though, that these paintings right here, and everybody thinking too that, yeah, well, talk about for the eclipse of 2022 there, and but it sure seems that way that when we speak about talking about capturing sky view images and all that, and thinking as to, okay, yeah, with InDesign, that can you use InDesign for most of those supported files. And yeah, if it's JPEG, I'm like, yeah, JPEG images and also Photoshop files. But on the other hand, too, that we're also talking about is that when we speak about InDesign, that we're talking about a number of mixed media files that contain in just maybe 3 pages. So, like, let's just say if everybody's thinking is toward that, you start working a project, and let's just say that you actually you only use 3 pages out of what you're working with, and you use your 3 pages, and let's just say that the main reason why you're using it InDesign just to be able to put this all together is just because of the fact that if there is anything like graphics that you want to add, and maybe text editor tools or anything like that that you want to use, or maybe links or like anything like that, any updates that you need, any labels or anything like that that you want to do, but still that that you like any thinking is toward it. The main purpose about using InDesign will be as toward, if you're trying to build a project and you're talking about is that the one page, just doesn't fit at all or something like that. But on the other hand, that we're talking about is that with these photographs right here, you got this right here is a photograph right here, and you got the photograph right here, and then the painting right here. But it sure seems that way that that you're able to get a clear idea of what's going on with this image right here, right? And, you see the image, but then you're also want to know too that most of the time with any publishers would say this to where it's good to go ahead and include any text or any anything that you want to add to that right there, and anything about these images right here, and then knowing about what all that you can place on there that's viewable. And so like all those other experts would say too that whenever you do use InDesign for any reason at all, and want to know too that well really that whenever you first heard about it, that you actually mainly were using it, if anything, just to view just to open up a document, if anything. But it sure seems that way that if you're trying to build a project, that this project is maybe going to contain about more than 5 or 10 pages, and that's whenever you're like, okay, well, you get the idea pretty much, but still, but looking at right here with these pictures right here, and plus looking at this right here, talking about with the solar eclipse, and but it sure seems that way that when we speak about pixels, though, especially that pixels are these cube-looking objects. I'm like, so small that you can just barely see them. But it's like, if there's any filters or anything, in that image that contain anything such as to where really that if you were to try to print this later on, then the printer is going to tell you that, okay, well, there's a problem trying to print this out because we're not able to capture it. So when we're talking about that, it goes from using a Word document or using a Photoshop document, or maybe even using Lightroom, that any media that you were using from before, that if you were trying to use that same file in InDesign and then maybe try to print it off later on, and then they say is toward that you would I'm like, most of the time if this is a support a file, but it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to using InDesign, though, that what you basically are using are files that were created using the similar programs, and so that's why it sure seems that way that when we speak about InDesign, though, that you're pretty much you're placing media that were created using using a similar you was using another program, but it was similar to the one. I'm like, that's supported, right? And so that's why it seems like to where that the main purpose about using InDesign. Like people say that it's really to reduce the size of it. So let's just say that everything that you see here in this photograph, that if you check the properties location on there, and you know for sure it's going to tell you the details that this file right here originally contained. It contains up to 500 or so pixels of file size, a pixel size, and so it's like you want to know too that the main purpose to why you would use InDesign, and like everybody else would say too. Well, really, the main purpose to why you would use InDesign for sure is like if you're trying to use like any source of build a project to include a story or something like that, or any source of news medias or any source of media that you want to use. But a lot of times it sure seems that way that whenever we're talking about images right here, that it's like you use that same image that you worked in Photoshop, but then if you were to actually place it onto a document using InDesign, that what it's pretty much telling you is that you are actually making the file smaller to where it'll be able to fit on that document, right? So it's like if it's really about shrinking the size of that document to where you can actually fit it on the page, right? So let's just say that from the beginning that a lot of this media right here that contained that larger size, larger size of the memory, the size, larger sizes of a memory, right? And so right now, that what you're trying to do is you're trying to shrink it down to where it would all fit onto the document, right? And so that's why it seems like toward it that looking at these images right here and looking at all this media right here, and the first thing that you think about is that well, really that if you can add more pages, and maybe if you can maybe share with the client, and just say anything that you would like to add, and maybe anything that you would like to publish, and so that's why it sure seems that way that when we speak about photographs, and when we speak about designs, though, that the first thing that really comes to your mind is that it's all artifacts or something like that, or it's pictures or something like that, but at the same time, that when we speak about text writing, and let's just say that the first thing that somebody might even say too is that we viewed this, we saw this already, but we are saying that this story was not noticed. It was not noticed from before. So a lot of designers might even say too that if you're going to be working in InDesign file, that you can leave some media out. And like, let's just say that if you were working a job and working for a publishing company, and they'll tell you that really that what you really are supposed to do, that you're supposed to use all those resources that were provided in that project, just to be able to place on a document, right? You were supposed to provide that information to the media about talking about the story, and including inserting the text and explaining about what they had to say right here, and whenever it comes to the stories in the community, right? And so it's like most designers might say that you can leave some data out, and you can go ahead and place some data in the story, right? But it sure seems that way that whenever every time you open up a PostScript document or maybe a PDF file document, you might see that to where something is missing. And that's why it seems like to where that when we speak about InDesign or even Distiller, Is it really about the fact about finding something missing? And a lot of times, like almost everything you're working with, you might find something missing. And finding something wrong, or missing. And so it sure seems that way that as a designer, though, that would you maybe think as to where that, okay, whenever you're going to be building a project using InDesign, that is everybody else asking the same question to where that before you didn't know what you wanted to talk about, you didn't know what to do, so it was basically like a draft, right? A draft to where that you were not sure what you wanted to use, so it was like a kind of like more like a question mark like that. So like everybody else would say too that whenever you first start working on a project, that you are just really, it's I guess you say about the uncertainty, right? And uncertainty and so it's like if you're trying to put together a news article, though, that it sure seems that way. That when we speak about InDesign, that it's like, yeah, what you basically are doing is that you're building a project that contains more than 17 pages, and sometimes it's supposed to make it a little bit more interesting, more easier to readable for everybody else to really understand what is it that you see right there. But like a few other people might even say too that whenever you first start working a project, even on InDesign, that you were thinking too that you didn't really know where how to even start, and even if you did know how to build in a project or anything like that on there, then it sure seems that way that you have that ability to where you can leave something out, and so whenever you leave out that information, and like everybody else would say too, that maybe that's another reason why that some editors might say that show us proof of what you put together here. That we want you to title this file here, this folder, that pre-edited or pre-reviewed. And most of the time, a lot of editors might even say that you'll please, the pre-reviews or something like that. And like a lot of editors might even say that really really is it really best advice that for any source of document that you're going to be working with, that if you name a file something like for like underscore something like that, if you name a file something like the news media media underscore review, but also pre underscore print underscore ready. So a lot of times it seems like that you really what does that mean whenever you do say something like that? And especially if we're talking about any files or any folders that you're going to be working with. So why would you want to give a file any sort of description like that? And like people might think as if it's really advised to where if you're going to be doing any editing, or maybe if you're going to name that folder by a specific name in general, and 102 that if you did make any changes, or if you did had to go back and do any editing, but like it sure seems that way, like with InDesign, though, that people really need to know, like, yeah, if it's really I say that, yeah, so it sure seems that way that whenever you're going to be working a job, though, that I guess people, I'm like, yeah, rendering and then just to verify, modify documents, right? And so a lot of publishers might even say that it really helps out a lot, so that way they can see what's going on with that media, about if there was any changes or if that's the original, maybe if it is something that was modified. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that you want to know too, that really that this should only this should only take you 15 minutes. Like people might say that if you talk to an expert, if you did talk to an expert for sure, I'm like, that's not promised. That ain't promised at all. If anything, that if you're having to start from scratch, for sure. But let's just say, on average though, that if you're trying to put together a project on average, that you want to know too, that I guess maybe the courtesy way of how to describe that is toward it, that if anything, you'll have you'll be working on, it might take you 3 days to be able to work on it. But I tell you one thing, that whenever it comes to working a project using InDesign, that one key factor matter that we can remember is toward that you are collecting media from other from other software programs and placing it onto a project, right? So it's basically that you're cutting out these images and then pasting them onto a brand new document, to a fresh document, right? And that's why it seems like to where that we might think is to where, well, really, that all what we see right here seems to be one page right here, right? But then of course, with just that one page right there, that one page right there was formed, using another program. So it sure seems that way, that whenever we speak about InDesign, though, that we can also think about is toward that you are pretty much are building a library of if you want to kind of call it like a library, but you're basically are building this project that contains up to 5 or 10 or so pages worth of information. And that's why it sure seems that way, that looking at these images right here, and 102, that hey, that right there, I'm like, that right there is a painting right here. But then it's like people may want to know too, that the first thing that you see about an InDesign document, you want to know too, that really, if you're trying to print out anything that you see like on InDesign, and so let's just say on average though, that somebody's going to tell you that we want a printable copy of that media that we're looking at. So it's like a lot of companies might say that we need you to print out a copy of this, and in order to be able to do that, the problem is that we don't have a printable version available. And so that's why we're asking is toward it, this same data that you have available in InDesign, can you go ahead and give us that printable ability to where we can go ahead and print that out, or if you can send that, if we do send us a shareable link to where we can retrieve that. And so I know a lot of times it seems like we probably think as to where that, with InDesign, that whenever you do open it up, and then you want to know too that okay, InDesign, that's where you design stuff, right? But I'm like, well, really, think about the print roller or something like that. Think about InDesign as another way. It's like a printing room, right? It's a printing room too. It's like like the printing press room, to where whenever you do walk into this room, that you're gathering media from that was used in other programs, just to be able to piece together a project. And that project, of course, is going to be formed into a file that contained to where people can look at it. if somebody can see it and then they can see if there was any text or readings or anything like that, they were pre-edited, right? But like any editor might even say that, really, that if you're going to be editing any files, for sure, that can you really show everybody here that about what is it, about how you put this together right here. But like this right here is, yeah, PDF file. But I'll go and show everybody here that talk about for copy and paste right here, and the appearance and But on the other hand, that I'm like, yeah, and then you have this more option right here. But still, that yeah, print ready. You're for print. Open in another app, but in the details right here. And it's going to tell you that, yeah, but right there, PDF file. 68, yeah, the size of it. So I think that that's the main reason why we all, like everybody else, would say too that maybe that's the main reason why you use InDesign for your files, is so that way you can shrink down the size of the media, like whenever it was first created in Illustrator and Photoshop, that the files that contain about maybe a few 100 pixels of memory size, but then whenever you shrink it down and create a PDF file for it, that you're able to reduce the size of that file and able to use it. And like if anybody were to try to view that document, and then they will be able to look at it, right? And if they want to make copies of it, right? But it sure seems that way, that when we're talking about InDesign, that want to know too that, yeah, well, really, that when we speak InDesign, that people, what you really are seeing right here is like this document right here, right? You're looking at this document, but you don't really see all those details about okay, what program that was used to be able, like, yeah, if this was edited, or if this right here, I'm like, yeah, how many pixels, what's the file size right there. So so when we talk about maybe 4 or 5 pages that contain on that document, but then not everybody is able to view the details about the actual size of the files, on that document. So that's why it sure seems that way, that when we like designers would say too, there's to where that yeah, number one, if you're trying to download a file that was sent to you through the email, or if you were trying to download a share file or an IT file or something like that, and there might be some times to where it takes longer just to be able to download it and just to be able to open up that document. And like everybody else might even say too, maybe that's another reasons why that that is to where that whenever you do try a lot of times, that you're trying to open up the document, but sometimes it takes too long, just to be able to download it and just to be able to open it up. And that's why it's like, yeah, well, really, with most of the time with InDesign, that you're able to shrink down the file size right there and able to convert it to a PDF file. And but still, that at the same time, that not everybody is really able to look at the details about about the size of the files, and like, yeah, well, really, I'm able to open this file up, and I'm able to look at that data from here. Yeah, well, I'm able to open up this file right here from the phone. But in case of anybody that didn't know, though, that there are programs that you can use that from where that information was created, and that contain a lot more pixels, a lot bigger memory size in compared to what you see here. So that's why it seems like to where that whenever it's finally printed, whenever you actually are able to view that same document with that media, that that's one of the reasons why that when we talk about with InDesign, though, that you're able to view that on that page, right? But you're just at the same time that a lot of information about about the size of the file and everything, that shouldn't be too much of a problem now, because that that amount of data was reduced, just because a PDF file was created. And so that's why it seems like everybody else might say that, whenever you do build a project using InDesign, that you are pretty much that you are making it smaller. You're reducing the size of the file to where that people can actually open up that file and turn the pages without having to worry about the size of the file all the time, and maybe about the fact about what could be missing, and maybe what needs to be edited and maybe modified or anything like that. But it sure seems that way that when we speak about InDesign, though, that we don't need to have it to where that if you're going to be building any sorts of projects, though, and 102 that really that if you're trying to build a project using InDesign, that it's like you can't have it to where that maybe that if you want to use about maybe 5 images, though, and like let's just say people say that making a duplicate copy of the same page, and if you want to put that on the next page. So it's like people might say that is to where if you know any clients who want a copy of something, there's an easy way to do that. So it sure seems that way that tell the press, though. It's like you don't really if you need to make a copy of something, you can do that pretty simple and easy. Use it by use. I'm like I'm like using PDF, and but still it if you would actually duplicate a page, and then also if you would add any a fresh new page, stuff like that. But any text or anything like that. But a lot of designers would say too that well, if you're going to be looking at this document right here, and you're going to say is toward it, well, really, people are wanting to know too that they're going to be looking at this page right here, but they believe that that there's more than that. There's a lot more than that you're not telling them. And but talk about right here, talk about for the eclipse, and like everybody else would say too that well, really that anything that you want to add to that or anything like that. But I tell you one thing that when we speak about InDesign at number one, though, that do you think that maybe the main purpose to why you would want to use InDesign so that way you can look at something? You're not really like everybody else would say too that just look at something and just to be able to view it and just to see what all that you can do with the digital media, but at the same time, that it's like, well, really, that do you think that it's very professional to leave something out just because that you might think that, okay, well, really, that if it's really about the fact about, like all the other designers might even say too, about, property ownership. The property ownership, and so it sure seems that way that when we are going to be putting together a project using InDesign, that you might think is toward really you may not have permission to use that media, or for any reason that during the time you were not allowed to release that information until but I tell you one thing that when the way with InDesign, though, that in case if anybody that were to warn or know too, that with InDesign, that do you think that whenever you're trying to build a story on top of the media right there, and thinking is toward it, well, really that why is it that you would leave something out? You would leave something out for what reason? You would leave something out, but then put something in. You would leave something out, but then put something in. You would leave something out, but then put something in. So I guess anybody say that you could you hide the story, or maybe if you do decide if you don't want to share, or maybe for any reason at all that you do not have permission just to be able to publish it just quite yet. So it's like, so it sure seems that way that whenever we're talking about programs like InDesign, that it's like you want to know too that is it really over the fact about the personal ownership about anything that's shared, or maybe anything that needs to be explained, and anything that needs to be exchanged or something like that. But at the same time, that we're also talking about is just to that, yeah, well, that's my property, or that, yeah, that my, so it sure seems that way that that when when we speak about InDesign though, that you want to know too that, yeah, number one, that it seems a lot easier whenever you watch somebody else do it, for the most part. But like at the time, it seems like that yeah, well, whenever you watch somebody do something, and it seems a lot easier, but still that but it's like, yeah, just like turning the page, that whenever you do open up a file, you're opening up just one page right here, right? But then that one page right there is just going to show these images right here, right? And you want to know too that did yeah, this file alone right here is not probably not going to show the details about the size of the files before, whenever they were being worked in Photoshop. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that when we speak about InDesign, that a lot of those designers and publishers might say is to where that, yeah, well, really, that yeah, you can maybe say something like you know uh, in case so that way you won't get too bored with the story. So yeah, so a lot of times it seems like yeah, whenever you first start working this, that yeah, see inside for details. So a lot of times it seems like that whenever you're going to be working a project though, that how do you know if your readers and then your subscriber, I'm like, how do you know if people are going to be really interested in what you're working on? And like for the most part, that 102, that this one page alone, yeah, that this one page alone contains contains images and graphics that were imported and exported from other programs. So it's basically like everybody else would say too, that this one document right here alone. So like anybody say that whenever you do open up this document right here, it's just one page right here, right? It's just one page. So people might even think too that really, is it really easier or harder to tell about that one document right there? You can't really tell about how much work that was developed into where that you go ahead and put together the information right there, and actually send it to another program, just to be able to place it onto a page, just to be able to get it print ready, right? And so that's why it seems like to where that yeah, a lot of viewers might say that it seemed a lot easier to open up that document right there, just because of what reason? Well, just because it's a smaller file size. You were able to condense it down to a smaller file size, and so that's why it don't contain all those pixels in size. And but still, that at the same time, though, it's like, yeah, well, really, that knowing about, if we're talking about up to 5 or 10 pages of different media right here. But people might even say too that really that just to make sure that you don't get too bored with it, like say, yeah, well, the boring story, yeah, I can maybe put on here the boring topic, the boring story about this starts, yeah, with from yeah, black and white, the CMYK or something like that. I mean, yeah, people might even say too, really, black and white is really not all that bad, but like CMYK, so CMYK, and you want to know too that between a bet and CMYK, but knowing about the boring story. So like anybody else would say that, really, what's going to be more interesting about it is that the fact about what's going to be what makes it more interesting for sure. What makes it more interesting for sure is maybe going to be advised as to where that, yeah, well, really, that the magical part about it is to where that you can actually view it on your devices. And I tell you one thing, everybody, that yeah, shouldn't that be the whole magical purpose about InDesign, is to where you can now you can now view this information on other devices. So that's, I guess you say that that's really the beauty of it, is that you can now view this information on other devices. So if I want to go ahead and maybe put like a heart in along with that, maybe like with that little happy face right there or something. But still, that each time we think about InDesign document though, that it's like, yeah, that this information right here, this information is provided to you. This information is provided to you by that designer who gave that privilege to review that medium. So like I say, that's the beauty of InDesign. The privilege of reviewing that medium. So like, let's just say that, yeah, it seemed a lot easier this time just because it was converted to PDF file, right? And, we're also talking about, there's PostScript files, and then there might also be another type of file too, but that you can use, but still that. So we're talking about maybe 5 or 10 pages that would normally contain up to 45, up to 45 maybe altogether. Yeah, altogether about 4,500 pixels. That's probably, that seems about right. All together that it'll be equals that media right there, that media, everything that you see even on the streaming service, about almost everything that you see in that streaming service right there would originally contain 4,500 pixels of data, but then it's provided to you by a smaller capacity just because it was converted to PDF. And so that's why people might say is to where if that makes it real, I guess that's the beauty of it, is to where that information right there was it was created using InDesign, but now since you were able to make that size smaller to where you can actually publish it to where people can actually see that they can see what you had to talk about and what you put together right there. So I don't know if everybody really realizes that, but still, at the same time, that it's like whenever we think about InDesign, though, we're also talking about is that a lot of the media that you're putting together right here, that like everybody else may not be able to see it, and like everybody might even think too that every time you use InDesign for the most part, that really that you may have to get back in that file and do editing, or maybe update anything that needs to be updated. But I tell you one thing, though, that a lot of things from what you can do using InDesign. But I just really think too that it's like do you think that maybe any designer would maybe say is toward anything they decide to leave out of the project for any reason at all, and maybe that's one of the reasons why that maybe people may say is toward, well, really, whenever I first started working on a project, I was told to only do this and only do that, and now I'm being told by request to go ahead and release this information. So yeah, by request, please, by request to go ahead and build another story that that talks about space, or I can say space, but so yeah, that you were told at the beginning, of course. I can maybe put that right here, that by request, the original, and I guess I can also put on here too that a lot of program like InDesign, to where you won't even be hurting the original. What you're doing is you're adding on, you're extending the original, but still that originally you were told to just to only provide one piece. So it sure seems that way that whenever you first started working on a project, that you only used one piece. You only used one piece, so that way you can give me you give me the shorter version of this, so that way I can better understand what is it that you're talking about, what it is that you're talking about. Give me the shorter version. Well, the shorter version, as we know, is that just one piece to word it. What is a few examples. The shorter version would be no more than 3 or 4 images, and maybe a storyline to include onto that. So it sure seems that way that whenever you do build a project, though, that it seems like that you were asked to do a lot more than what you were originally were hired to do, and so that's why it seems like when we speak about InDesign, to word it a lot more. So it sure seems that way that every time we think about InDesign, or if we're thinking about PDF, or anything like that, or Photoshop, that at the time it seems like that if we were to use for only or something like that, but still that but when we're trying to piece together information right here, that it seems like to word really that you wind up spending a lot more time on a project than what you originally would agree to spend, right? And but still that but at the same time, though, that people might say is toward that one thing that you want to keep in mind about InDesign, though, that if there's a difference between what was already there, and then what is soon to come. And I can say that for what already present, and then for what is soon to come. So it sure seems that way that any readers and any viewers might even say that really there is a difference between what is already there, what was already there, and what is soon to come. What yeah what's soon, I'm trying to say what's soon to come. What's soon to come. And what's soon to come. And what's soon to come can mean a number of things, really. But I tell you one thing, though, to everybody, that people might think, oh yeah, well you can hide the text and all that, but still that you may not be able to use everything that what you were really desired to want to use, right? And that's why it seems like that the power of InDesign is to where you're able to you're able to generate all this media onto this document right here. It can also contain maybe 5 pages right here, but still that that whenever you're building onto a project, though, that you may not use everything, but it sure seems that way to where if you're waiting for that promotion, or if you're waiting for that authorization to be approved or something like that, but at the time you may want to know too that for what's soon to come, what was already published and all, but if we're talking about for the solar eclipse right here, and like people may think is to where really that looking at this really closely right here, the total solar eclipse right here, but it's like you want to know too that with any of these images, I don't know if we all were able to look at this really closely right here, but it seems like that that whenever you do look at some of these images right here, and want to know too that for what's soon to come, that whenever you first use this right here, that you actually were just kind of experimenting around with the things that you can do, right? But at the same time, it's like well, really, not everybody's really going to be able to tell what that's supposed to mean right there until like you go to the next image. I can go and show everybody here this right here. This design right here actually shows right here is the ring right here, and so if we were to actually look at that right there, using InDesign, and 102, that well, really, not everybody is really going to know what that really is right there, but let's just say though that it's supposed to mean the eclipse, right? But at the time, you want to know too that for any reason at all, that is it really supposed to show like maybe the mirror eclipse or something like that? Like a mirror or something like that, and mirror inner or something like that. The mirror reflector, the mirror inner reflector or something like that. Inner reflector, and so it sure seems that way that the different tools and stuff like that, the thing that you can download, even on Photoshop, but still that. So when we get some ideas just by looking at an image right here, and I want to know too that you look at some of these paintings and these illustrations right here, and add in maybe a few special effects or anything, and you want to know too is toward well, really that. Whenever you look at some of these photographs right here, that is that really going to kind of get you in mind toward okay, you're going to be building a project using InDesign, right? But then at the same time, though, it's like well, really that you didn't use all that data that you were going to use at the beginning, and so that's why it sure seems that way toward it. you know, people might say is toward the, yeah, well, really, that you did not include that, or that there were some things that you decided not to use, and some media that you decided to go ahead and use that instead, or something like that. So everybody say that is toward, whenever you're going to be building a project in InDesign, that what well, how do you want to go ahead and explain this topic right here to where that you want to go ahead and use this instead, you use this media instead, and then I'm like, yeah, use this instead, and you replaced you replaced you replaced this with this with that similar. So a lot of times that usually, yeah, a lot of times that usually happens whenever that there's any data that is missing off of that location. Like, let's just say that if there was any files that were deleted, if there was any media that was deleted or missing, from the previous location. Let's just say a lot of this has to do with the fact about if there was any updates or anything like that, or maybe corrupt files or anything like that. But a lot of times it seems like that any missing data that's containing on it this on the file. So like, let's just say that, yeah, well, really, that whenever you're going to be building a project, though, that you might think is to where, okay, yeah, well, you can see almost everything from here, right? But then whenever you do, yeah, you go back to it later on, and you're trying to add on to that same project, and then you're going to maybe see is to where all this. I'm like, yeah, we can't see it here because this is a PDF file document, but still, that this right here, just this one page. But I tell you one thing, that whenever we speak about InDesign, though, that it's like, yeah, well, with InDesign, that what you are pretty much doing is you're building, you're putting together this media, gathering media, you know, created in other programs, just to be able to place onto this document right here. And at the same time, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a page to where everybody, people that you share it with will be able to view it, right? And so that's why, like, a lot of designers would say too, that whenever you're going to be building a page right here, that person who's trying to open up that document should not have any problems with the size of the file being too large to where they can't see it. And a lot of times that usually happens to where if you're trying to share a story with somebody or share a file with somebody, that what they actually see right here is what you put together right here, just this one page alone right here. And but at the same time, it's like, yeah, whenever you go back and see that actual software program that you used for just to be able to build that project, and then they're able to tell all the resources, all the properties, the information for what you use just to be able to create it. And so that's why it seems like that yeah, publishers might say that, really, that do publishers state to where that, if they're pretty busy with trying to get a number of copies published, for a project or anything else like that they're working with, and 102 that, yeah, well, really, they don't really pay attention to where that, what, for, yeah, all the details about, what was used just to be able to come up to this point of perspective and all that. But at the same time, you want to know too that, okay, yeah, but these are just the images right there. But whenever you see maybe 5 or more pages on top of that, and 102 that, okay, well, how show me how you were able to form that. And so that's what I was about InDesign. But anyway, I hope you guys have some good information right there. And thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.